Dare we open Pandora's mystic box?
To every generation, a slayer is born, except this time there were 6.
This is the dimension of imagination. You are entering the mystic zone.
Do you ladies see that aura? Something wonderful this way comes.
Welcome, listeners. This is the Mystic Order of East Alabama podcast. I am Mystic Mary. I'm the nebulous mystic.
And I'm Mystic Margie, the illuminator mystic.
I'm Mystic Marion, the dog whisperer mystic.
And I'm the queen, Gail, the mystic queen.
We are so excited to have a special guest with us today. We have Mary Helen Brown, and she comes all the way from Texas, except she stopped by Auburn, Alabama for about 30 years, so she's really in our neighborhood. She's an author and a good old person. Mary Helen, will you introduce yourself?
I am, in fact, Mary Helen Brown from Center, Texas. My father used to say he was happy to be among august company even when it was July, so I'm really happy to be here. I came to Auburn through a rather circuitous path. I'm the type of person who constantly makes poor decisions and they turn out fairly well. So I've lived in Texas, Louisiana, Kentucky, back to Texas, up to Wisconsin, where I gave up a job when I wasn't sure I'd be offered a job at Auburn University. Thankfully I was, and then it seems to have stuck, and I've been here ever since.
But Auburn is your favorite, right?
Oh, I don't know. I'm right fond of Center, Texas, and try to get back there home to that red dirt. Auburn has red dirt, too.
Yeah, we've got plenty of red dirt. It's called, here's a new word, ultasoils. That's the word I learned recently. It means red dirt. Did you know there was a word for red dirt?
No idea.
So that is a really good segue, Mary Helen, because we were sort of going to talk about stories today. I just heard a quote. I think it's Tolstoy who said there are only 2 stories in all of great literature. A stranger comes to town and a man goes on a journey. So you've opened up with a nice journey from Center to Auburn. And I'm curious about that theory about all the good stories.
Well, my mom always said it came from one of 2 places, the Bible or Shakespeare.
Okay.
So maybe Tolstoy is onto something.
Well, when I started planning to talk today about stories, I was reading The Ultimate Storyteller, Pat Conroy, and he recommended a book to his readers, as he did many times in the book. And so I looked this book up on Amazon. It was called Infinite Jest, and I always read the customer's review, and I wanted to tell you this since you're all story writers, and you will be customer reviewed too. But this is my favorite review ever. Out of a mountain of books, this is possibly the worst writing I've ever read. Each sentence feels as if they were crafted by 2 separate children being viciously beaten with a thesaurus.
Oh.
I had a full-blown migraine by the 2nd chapter. By the 3rd, I wanted to blow my brains out. It's pretentious garbage. Do not fall for it. I can't wait to pulp this waste of a forest. I'll make a fantastic papier-mâché for my next sculpture.
Well, I definitely want to read that book now.
I was gifted that book a few years ago by the press that published it.
Well, is that your review?
Was that your review, Mary?
No. If I don't have something nice to say, I don't say anything at all.
Oh.
I guess you're not talking.
And when did you start this? Because I'd be very interested to, is that today or this summer? Because it's so hot here, we might as well try to be nice, or what?
It's a fairly recent decision.
How's it working out?
Not well. My blood pressure shot sky high.
Okay, well, I love that review. It's really hard to take it from there. So what we had put together, excuse me for stuttering, we had put together some ideas we might throw around on this podcast, like where do the good stories come from? And we all have our own ways of good stories coming to us, but I just finished Mary Helen's book, Headed for Home, and I'm very curious where that story came from.
Wow. I wish I knew. I think it's some part of my brain. Marion says I've got some little creature that lives in my head that every now and then just throws out some stories.
Oh, nice.
I wondered if that creature might live in the attic at Pebble Hill.
The creature just might. I wrote the book sitting at the dining room table at Pebble Hill before it was remodeled, and now there's no more dining room table. I find that confusing.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the little stories within the larger story are true-ish.
Uh-huh.
Things that happen to my family. The crazier the thing, the more likely it was to be true. For example, this isn't giving anything away, my mother really did build what she called a gazebo,
Okay.
which was a gazebo. She called it a gazebo or a gazelle. She built it out of scrap lumber and PVC pipe she found at an elementary school they were building, and they'd throw out the scraps, and she would go every day and say, Mary Helen, get the truck. And we would go out and pick up garbage. And she built what my father referred to as a beer garden.
Oh.
It was quite
Oh, cool.
large before it was over. She didn't like to mow, so she covered up as much of the backyard as she possibly could.
Well, Marion, tell us about your yard.
Well, as we speak, have tarps weighted down with rocks, killing the grass in my backyard for the same reason. I don't like to mow.
What are you going to grow there?
Dirt. Gonna grow dirt.
Well, I don't mow in my yard either because it's a natural yard. That's my excuse.
This is why we hire people.
Uh-huh.
It's for your yard. I actually have not one gardener but two because I have a big yard. So this is where your money needs to go. This is why you went to school every day and taught, so somebody could mow your yard.
Okay, well, that's going to be really hard to do because I don't have any grass in my yard.
I know.
As long that will be a good story. And speaking of a story seed of mine that got planted and it has not yet developed, but I hope it does someday, is somebody told me they drove through a pretty house out in the country. Well, half the yard was pretty. Half the yard had been mown and half the yard had pretty little flowers, but the other half of the yard was just crawling with weeds and sticks and briars. And I really want to know what the story is behind that half and half yard.
Do you think it's one of those before and after things?
I was thinking
think-
more of a domestic fight.
I think it's somebody who lives paycheck to paycheck, and when the paycheck comes, they get some yard done, and then when the paycheck's gone, they got to wait for the next paycheck.
Oh.
I'm pretty sure the flowers are done by the wife. And in hatefulness, she left half the yard for him. And so she can point at it constantly and say, that is your part. That's the he yard, and this is the she yard. And she tells this to the neighbors and his boss.
That's kind of what I was thinking. It's like a contest between a husband and a wife, and one of them said, I'm sick of doing all the work around here.
Yeah. Well, we have, as y'all see, we're sitting here looking at them, the he shed and the she shed. Mm-hmm. Because every time I'd put something in the he shed, and it was gardening stuff, a hoe, whatever, he'd say to me, that's taking up a lot of room. So I thought, hey, I know the phone number of the shed people. So the week later, I had a she shed.
I hope your she shed isn't struck by lightning.
No, I've seen that on TV.
Wait, what are you talking about?
There's that ad on TV where the she shed gets...
Cheryl's
She shed.
is struck by lightning. They have to call some insurance agency.
State Farm.
Oh,
I
State
think.
Farm.
Cheryl She Shed.
Yes. She's getting a she shed.
It's tricky.
Okay.
So instead of getting rid of the men in my life, I should have just spited them?
Yeah.
Okay, hindsight.
Now, see, I have a completely different theory.
Okay.
City limits ran through our house. So,
For real?
For
This
real.
must be in Texas.
Yeah, in Texas. It's a little town, Center, Texas.
Oh.
And for whatever reason, the city limit sign was right across the street from our house. And so I always assumed that when we went from one room to another, the population changed.
Yeah, yeah.
So
From
maybe,
what to what?
Well, it would have been somewhere between 1 and 4. Unless we had company, and then it could be
Tell
almost
it.
anything.
Population explosion.
Yeah, it really could be.
What was it at Thanksgiving?
Oh, Thanksgiving. Well, if we were at the dining room table, it would have been more than if we were just in the TV room.
I see.
Because
Do you have to alert the mayors of the town when y'all move to the TV room?
not so far, but it made taxes a mess. But maybe the people, the city makes them mow. In the part
like
that's
they
on
have
the
an
city.
ordinance.
Yeah, and then the other side's out in the country and they don't have to mow.
Oh, that's interesting. That's a good thought. I'm gonna have to find this house.
Yeah, that's-
So see all these stories come about. I lived in an apartment as well that the city line between Cambridge, Massachusetts, and Watertown, Massachusetts went through my apartment, and I was on the Watertown side. We had a joke. What's the difference in Watertown girls and trash? No? Trash gets picked up. so I wrote a story about that actually, and it's in our book Not the Moth, which is sort of the second edition of Be the Flame, and that's available on Amazon. Anybody that wants to read that story. Speaking
That
of
is
stories,
an excellent book. I've read it.
Isn't that a nice book?
And we've somehow fallen from talking about our stories and seed star stories, and because I'm the academic serious one here,
Hail to the Queen.
I studied how Pat Conroy got stories, and I realize now why I'm not Pat Conroy. And I listed them, and the first is it's because I'm not Catholic, and no nun has ever hit me with a ruler or vandalized me in any way, as they did Pat Conroy. The second reason I'm not Pat Conroy is I never had a losing season because I didn't play team sports with guys at the Citadel. And then third, I never had a violent father or any father at all. And so, I'm probably just as talented as Pat Conroy. I just haven't had his wonderful experiences for seeding stories.
Go ahead. Well, that's what our mystic emeritus, Judy, used to say, that she didn't have a distressing childhood, and so she lacked the stuff for stories. And then she would tell us about being the Methodist minister's daughter.
That would be distressing.
I know. Like, that's a story.
My mama used to tell me that preachers' children were the worst children of all.
Yeah.
She'd say, put the weights on top of the cuckoo clock. The preacher's children are coming and they'll pull it off the wall.
Well, our mystic Joanne, our mystic defender, she's our Catholic, so she's not able to put in her 2 cents worth on abusive Catholic people. But
So maybe between us all, we could be Pat Conroy.
Well, did you have an abusive father?
no, I didn't either.
No,
Well, Joanne
none here.
didn't have an abusive father, but she had 13 brothers and sisters.
Yeah, so
And that's pretty abusive
Yeah.
right there. And she said, they'd sleep head to feet in the beds.
There you go. That's
At night.
abusive.
that's why she wrote the story. She never had to make her bed because somebody was always in it.
Where could somebody find that story and read it, I wonder?
Well, that's in our latest cookbook called Mastering the Art of Wench Cooking. That one, The Unmade Bed, I think is the name of it.
And how would one get that book?
I think it's available through Amazon.com.
And by the way, so is your book, Mary Helen, because I looked it up, Headed for Home. And you can read about solving mysteries through seances, sort of.
Sort of.
Very, very loosely.
Yeah.
You can also find some mighty good recipes, or at least suggestions of recipes in Headed for Home. You want to
Yeah.
talk about those recipes a little bit, Mary Helen?
Oh, my goodness. Are you talking about the world famous taco guts?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, taco guts. How to make taco guts. You get a pound of hamburger meat. You get a can of Frito refried bean dip.
Okay.
You open the bean dip. You dump it into the hamburger meat. You scramble it,
Okay.
and you're done.
Okay, those are the guts, but how do you eat it?
Well, you can eat it any way you want to. You could put it in a taco. You could make a taco salad. You could make a version of a Frito pie, which is also very good. I'll have to tell you the Frito pie recipe.
Yes, please.
Yeah. Let's have it.
What else you can do? You can dip it. Frito pie. All right, Frito pie is Fritos. You cut open the sack, kind of like you're doing open heart surgery.
Uh-huh.
You go one down, one across at the bottom. Fold it open.
Okay. Got it.
Take a can, well, heat it up first, but take a can of Wolf brand chili, heated. Pour it on top of the Fritos. Then you can put some cheese, or you can shred up some Velveeta if you want to be real fancy. I have a friend who says she is not a redneck because her family used Hellman's on their pear salad. So you can use Velveeta, or you can use just any kind of cheese you might have. And if you like onions, you can chop up some onions on top of it. But if you don't like onions, you can leave that off. It is optional.
And you just eat it right out of the
out of the bag.
the sack.
That reminds me very
Right
much
out of
of a
the bag.
recipe that I put in the winch cooking book that I got from a prisoner about how they made prison food in the bag. When somebody's parent, loved one, wife, spouse, whoever sent food that the prison authorities allowed them to keep, they had it down pat how they could split up in the bag and put the food in. I can't remember that recipe, but if anybody's interested, they could refer to Mastering the Art of Winch Cooking, available where?
On Amazon.
On Amazon.
Are you asking the prisoners that don't know this recipe to get in contact with you, Marion?
There's a mastering book over there in the corner.
That's good.
All right, well, while she's looking up the mastering recipe, well, I didn't say that right, but you know what I mean.
Straight from the prison.
Because we had a couple of our fans answer a query that we put out on Twitter, I do want to be sure they get their moment of fame here. We sent out a question asking our friends where they got their ideas for stories, and we had a couple of answers, so I'm going to share two of those from our mystic friend Clarence Dean Bonner, who is the author of the book I Talk Slower Than I Think, An Antidote to Helicopter Parenting. He gets his stories from things he sees and hears, and he notices the little things that pass others by, therein the seeds of a story lie. And we have another mystic friend, Gita, whose work you can find on her blog, Oh Fine, Just Fine. She stresses that her stories are character-driven, that her characters speak to her, and the plot, scenery, and dialogue come straight from the characters. Sometimes she feels like the characters dictate, and she just types.
Well, thank you, Dean and Gita.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
So that back in the day, I heard on some other podcast, that's what they called being creative. You weren't creative, you had a creative. And I could be getting this all wrong, but you were just a vessel, and the creative worked through you. And I would love to wake up one morning and just have that happen to me.
I used to go to the omelet shop. Does anybody remember when the omelet shop was open in Auburn? Mm-hmm. I used to go over there to grade compositions because once you bought a cup of coffee, they just kept refilling it. And I would overhear the seeds of stories in the omelet shop. And I'm going to guess that it's okay for me to say this since we've said worse on this podcast. But I was sitting there one night grading, and I heard one of the waitresses at the omelet shop say, "Some folks is so damn picky, you'd think they had taste buds in their ices." And I mean, there's a story that's going to grow out of that. And then she went on to tell me how she and her boyfriend snaked drains, but that she had a great old big bald spot right here where the hook got hung in her hair, and they had to pull her hair and all out to get the hook out. I just heard story after story after story at the omelet shop. So listening, going to a place where people gather late at night.
Mm-hmm.
I bet that helped you grade those compositions.
Yeah.
This is not creative.
I used to do the same kind of listening when I had my hair done, and my favorite one was the hairdresser next to mine was getting a divorce, and she said, "I told that judge when he said I didn't cook for him that I'd have to slap that fry daddy on the bar at the Holiday Inn because that's where he was all the time."
Yeah, eavesdropping's good.
I heard one not too long ago. I was back in Center, Texas, and I was shopping, I guess, and I heard over in the next aisle, "Well, you know he's in the pen."
They weren't talking about their dog either, I bet you.
I was at the heart doctor with my parents about this time last year, and the receptionist asked a patient in the waiting room, "Is so-and-so and so-and-so, I'll make up a name, is Jenny Lou Baker still your contact, Mr. Baker? And he said, hell no. You ain't going to be able to reach her in jail. And of course, the receptionist, I guess, had been trained to act as if he had just said, of course, or
Updated his contact.
Right.
Yeah, but
Right.
so just about anywhere you go, you can get the kernel for a story, or at least the beginning of a character. I did track down from Mastering the Art of Winch Cooking the penitentiary burritos, and they're cooked, Mary Helen, and they include ramen, but you crush a bag of Doritos, but you don't let the bag tear because it's going to be your bowl. So you mix the whole thing
That's
up.
the same concept.
Right, same concept. And that recipe's followed by correctional cake. If anybody would like to look those recipes up when they get their copy of Mastering the Art of Winch
Well, they
Cooking.
could come in handy.
And I believe you have a recipe in this book, Mary Helen.
Yes, I have a recipe for my mother's biscuits, which, until she learned how to open the whomp biscuits, were purely terrible.
I love those whomp biscuits.
My mama, I think I mentioned this in the story, but my daddy, after they first got married, told my mama that he did not know it was possible to make homemade crackers.
Well,
They were a little dense.
tell us what a whomp biscuit is.
Well, you know those cans that you get out of the refrigerator section at the grocery store that you take the wrapper off and just whomp them on the side. And
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
I remember Jerry Clower saying in his neighborhood it sounded like a young war every morning because all the wives were hitting those biscuits against the edge of the counter.
A whomp war.
when you talk about stories, I used to teach a class in storytelling, and we'd talk about urban legends. And there's a very famous urban legend about whomp biscuits that someone
Please.
well, this woman was in her car, and all of a sudden she heard this giant kapow, and something struck her in the back of the head really hard, and she thought she'd been shot, and reached back there and felt her brains coming out, and it was a terrible thing. But it was, I guess, summer in the South, and it had overheated, and the whomp biscuits exploded and wound up hitting her in the back of the head.
So are you telling me that's not true?
It is not true.
I've been hearing that story all my life, and I thought it was true.
Well, it would have happened in many, many states and at many different times, and you'd think people would learn.
My husband is from Staten Island, New York, and he's a pizza maker. And we used to have friends over, and Bob would get the pizza dough and throw it in the air and show off and make these fabulous pizzas. And one night he threw it in the air, and it hit the overhead fan and near about killed half the guests.
Flinging around.
That now.
So at that time we'd call somebody and ask them over to dinner, they'd go, "Are you having pizza?"
Oh, gosh. Well, I bet that pizza dough was mighty stretched out after that.
No, it went as a whole blob, like a bomb, so it was deadly.
But Mary Helen, you said you taught a class in storytelling.
I did.
Well, we ought to just hush our mouths and let you talk a bit.
Oh, well, no. It gets really, you start talking about things like learning about the preface and the recounting and the closing. And how to do it. Yeah, it's just...
They like story arc and stuff.
Yeah, and things
you
like
use-
narrative fidelity and narrative coherence. And
I believe there was a term called narrative. I can't
probability.
Profluence.
Profluence.
Sounds like something you go to a doctor for.
Look it up. It confused me so much when I taught fiction writing. I thought, how am I supposed to judge them on their narrative profluence when I don't know what that means?
What does it mean?
I think it just means that the narrative makes sense. It's a logical narrative.
Oh,
Well, I love to listen to the Moth, that podcast.
yeah.
And those are all storytellers, and they do give them a little test before they let them on. Their line has to catch the people that judge who gets to get on and speak. But they're fascinating stories.
They're very good, and they travel around. You can go hear them in person. We ought to do that sometime.
Yeah.
What? Who are
the
these
Moth?
people?
It's called
The
the
Moth
Moth
Story Hour.
And
It's a podcast.
It's a podcast that lasts an hour, and usually there are 3 storytellers, and they're just telling stories from their lives. And it's, I think the stories have to be true.
Yeah, they get up and do it in front of an audience too.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
they're
they
brave people.
Are we still talking about the seeds for stories, how we get stories, or are we moved on?
What would you
to
like
that?
us to be talking
No,
about?
I don't know. I'm just so confused. Are we supposed to have a recipe, or are we talking?
We're talking about a podcast, and the people get up and tell stories from
and,
their
and
lives.
you learn, stories beget stories, So
Yeah.
you think, maybe,
I don't think
my
there's any
life
way
could
to
have
be
done
off
that.
this topic on this podcast.
Well, in the same story about not growing up, but about living in Watertown and Cambridge simultaneously, I wrote about meeting this person in Harvard Square, and I thought that he was a street person because he was dressed in rags, and he would sit out in the street and he would tell these fabulous stories. He would tell modern-day tales of Shakespeare, and he would rock and move while he told those stories. And I was like, man, this guy is so interesting. I'm going to give him an apple or $1. And then I saw a picture of him in People magazine, and he's a professional storyteller with a storytelling degree from Harvard. I was chuffed.
Did you give him an apple
Not after that.
or $1?
Yeah, he didn't actually take my apple or my $1.
Oh,
He
I
did
see.
not allow me to condescend to him. But there, how was I to know? I was just a know-it-all 17-year-old.
Oh, there you go. Well, continuing with reading Pat Conroy, a good storyteller, he was saying this is something I'm not good at doing, that when he signs books, he lets people wait in line forever because he talks to each person that buys a book and he wants to hear their story. And if it's a good one, he goes, consider that stolen.
That's nice.
And that's kind of how I find my stories. I'm not good at listening to people unless they just happen to be so quirky, and then that's my story, and they can consider that stolen. And one of our books, Be the Flame, our very first book, I stole this story from a fellow swimmer who had been to a funeral, and I want to read the first line because it's the line that made me write the story. John Leroy put a gun to his head and blew out his brains last Wednesday. Brenda, John Leroy's fourth wife, had thrown him out of the double wide a couple of weeks earlier. Now, who wouldn't read that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you stole that story.
I stole it.
So you didn't actually.
The other story I stole that I love stealing, but I've been in trouble about it, is someone who lives on the Ocoee had this beautiful wilderness of a yard, and the people next door started cultivating their yard and putting all manner of concrete frogs that faced the wilderness house. And she was irate about this, and they became, neon frogs and painted concrete frogs and frogs on sticks. And so I said to her, consider this stolen. She goes, no, I'm going to write it. So I hope she has, because I sure did.
And that story's in one of the books and published. So, yeah, you better watch your stories.
Gail, I believe you might have stolen a story about some fossils.
Oh, I was just thinking of the
As
fossil
well.
story.
And we almost had we actually did have a little slip up on that story, because the slip up was that you would change the name to protect the guilty, and somehow or another, before it got put in the first draft of the book, in one of the spots in the story, the name went back to the real name.
Oh, yeah.
Remember that?
Yeah.
But if we're sticking to our theme, I know Truman Capote got In Cold Blood from a newspaper clipping that he read. And how many of us have been inspired to write a story from a newspaper clipping? I know I have. It looks like Mystic Mary might have.
Well, no, but I thought it would be so easy to find stories hidden in the newspapers. And I'm just going to take a second. I spent a minute reading over a newspaper one day, and I was like, man, there are a couple of good stories here. And oddly enough, the two I'm going to share are both from the sports section, which I don't usually read. But one of them is about a golfer whose name I can't pronounce. And he became a golfer because when he was a little toddler, he took a swig from a soda bottle that contained rat poisoning. And it gave him a terrible stutter and nervous disorder, and he became a golfer to overcompensate for the problems from the rat poisoning.
And did we look into how the rat poisoning got in the soda bottle?
Well, there's the story, Morning Glory. Take it away. And the other one is about a local person, Chuck person, in fact. And it said, here's a nice little sentence we could all write about. He grew up poor and suddenly came into millions of dollars without a clue how to manage it. So there's some stories right there. Like, I think just about anybody could take either one of those and create a whole world around
I'm
it.
happy to say he did not get jail time. I do know his story.
Are you kin to him?
No, I'm not getting to him, but he's a great guy, but unfortunately misstepped.
I like reading the bylines that are put in the wrong place, and also I like reading the ad page, Lost and Found. That's where I get a lot of my fodder. For example, one of my favorite is large white female found wandering on Highway 280.
I saw one for a lost dig one time.
A lost what?
Dig.
A lost dig.
A lost dig.
Dig, dig, dig.
Last seen in some neighborhood.
Oh, it must have been. Okay,
Dog.
got it. Figured it out. now I'm sad.
Some are slower than mine. I was still trying to figure it out.
I think slower than I talk. One of my favorites was a few Christmases ago in the OA News. There was a found baby Jesus, and I actually included a recipe to go along with that newspaper clipping in The Ploy of Cooking, another beautiful cookbook by the Mystic Order of East Alabama fiction writers, available.
I don't know. It used to be available on Amazon.
Is it out of print?
Excuse me, all of our books are available on Amazon.
So Ploy's not out of print?
It is not out of print, but you have to act fast. There are only a few copies left.
Okay. All right.
We'll reprint it when we get rich from selling all these books.
Is it wrong that I see things in obituaries?
No, that's
Not at all.
good.
No,
That's
please share.
Continue.
Well, just every now and then there'll be a good one.
That's right.
They have some description of how Daddy liked crawfish hunting and macrame. I think that wasn't quite it. I think it was frog gigging and macrame, and I thought
Those could be kind of similar.
that's a Renaissance man.
I like this promotional one I saw in the paper one time for the Art Association was going to have an auction, and all the august members of the Art Association were standing there holding pictures, and it said, "Fun for the performing farts."
The Auburn Plainsman one time, and we're not talking about seeds, I suppose, but I did enjoy something. The Auburn Plainsman was doing something about going to the art museum, and we have this wonderful art museum, and go to the art museum and expose yourself to art. No.
Now, the library is where you go in Auburn to expose yourself. We have a long, long history of people exposing themselves in the library here.
Really? Which library? The university?
The Ralph.
The RBD. Yeah,
The Ralph.
we just had almost every Sunday night. If you went to the library on Sunday night, it would be surrounded.
I feel
Why does Mary
left
want to know
out.
which library?
I feel left out.
I think
I've
she's
never
writing
been-
it down.
I've never been flashed in the library.
Well,
I was
one of the
flashed in
guys that went
Boston.
after was one of my colleagues.
Really?
Yeah, right when I first moved to Auburn, he came flying through 6th floor of the Haley Center, flying through, grabbed a bunch of stuff, went down the stairs. The police came up next. I'm just sitting in my office thinking, huh,
Way not to attract attention to yourself.
welcome to Auburn.
My sweet, sweet, sweet babysitter came over, called me one Saturday and said, "Can I come over and just talk?" And I said, "Sure, come on." And she came over and she was visibly shaken, and she'd been sitting in the library studying, and a man came and sat down beside her. And he cleared his throat or did something to make her look over, and he had exposed himself in a book.
Oh, gosh.
Next to her. And I said, "Laura, just slam the book shut. Just slam it shut if this ever happens to you again."
I think we're off topic.
Wait. What's that? It's time for Mystic Minutes. Moments. It's time for Mystic Moments. That was not a very loud fanfare. This is when we take just a brief moment to tell what we're up to in our creative endeavors. And Mary Helen, as our guest, what are you up to right now in your creative endeavors?
Well, I have kind of a secret project where I'm going to write a song.
Oh,
You wrote a song for us once.
You did, and you sang it.
I did write a song for y'all once. It was one of my better
It was excellent.
efforts.
You're welcome to sing it today. We'll take a minute out of our minute.
I don't think I have the words anymore.
Oh, okay. Well, I
Not to
can
put you
muster.
on the
You know what? If
I write
listening,
country western though, and like my best song was "I'm tired of being lonesome, but it's better than being tired of you." I don't quite know what this next one's going to be called, but I have someone in Nashville who's interested in working.
Oh,
with
really?
me,
So
that's
when it's
kinda cool.
when it's ready for the listening audience, we'll share it through our Twitter or Facebook feed for the whole world.
Well, that's intimidating.
Yeah, because the whole world keeps up with us on Twitter and Facebook.
I'd best slow down.
Yeah. Oh, I can't wait, Mary Helen. It'll be great. Marion, what are you up to?
What I was trying to do before I got here today, and one of the reasons I was running late, is I'm trying to write my column for the Citizen of East Alabama that was due yesterday, but she'll still accept it if she has it when she gets to her office in the morning. And I'm trying to write it about a book you're also reading. I'm trying to write it as an homage to Margaret Wrinkle's late migrations. So that's what I was working on right before I got here today.
All right. What's Gail up to, the queen?
Well, Gail's been traveling with her, well, not with, but because of her very gifted son. Rivers Langley had a show in Victoria, Canada. But the mystic moment I want to tell you about happened in Seattle. And that was my traveling companion insisted on staying in this real fancy hotel. And we got up early. We were going to be taking the ferry over to Victoria. And so I put on the only long sleeve blouse I'd packed. And I got in the elevator, and there were 3 women in the elevator, and they said to me, "Hey, where are you from?" And I went, well, Auburn, Alabama. And they said, "Well, welcome." So I get down to the floor that has the coffee and the breakfast, and I walk out of the elevator, and another woman said, "So glad to see you." And I said, "Well, thank you. I'm glad to see you too." And then actually 3 more women told me, "Hey," and "welcome." So when I lined up to get my coffee, the woman in front of me turns around and goes, "Oh, welcome. Which meetings are you going to?" And I said, "I'm not going to any meetings." And she said, "Well, you have on teal." And I looked around, and every single person in the lobby has on teal. And they're all cancer survivors. And so I felt like a big fake. Oh. It was either go up to my room and put on short sleeves or continue to wear my teal shirt. So anyway, I was thinking the people in this town were friendlier than Southerners, which I found highly impossible. But every single person told me hello.
Well, that's a moment, and there might be a story in there somewhere.
Are you planning to write a poem, perhaps, about wearing teal?
I'm afraid God will smite me for being an imposter. And so I'm trying to get over this.
And you said you weren't Catholic.
Now, I have a mystic moment.
Yay.
Well, in preparation for my travels coming up, my husband and I are going to England and Scotland. I went to Atlanta to get my hair colored, which I have to keep seeing Charlene. And I always have a good time with Charlene. But my friends Kim and his friend from France, Fabrice, met me, and we walked along the Beltline in Atlanta. And it was so much fun. We really did. And they were getting ready to go to Philadelphia, Mississippi, where Kim is from, to this some fair that's over there. And Kim was telling Fabrice, now you can't say any of your political feelings to anyone in Philadelphia, Mississippi. You just have to keep it to yourself. And Fabrice goes, but I am French, and I always tell the truth. So if they ask me, if they say something to me, I said, I am French, and if you want me to tell you the truth, I will. And he said, you'll be surprised how many times people go, well, that's okay, don't talk. So,
nobody wants to hear it.
Well, if we're telling moments like that, I got a Barnabas Collins T-shirt yesterday.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Where?
My friend
Thrifting?
Bill Weiss sent it to me.
how nice.
Isn't that sweet? Now, Mary Helen, do you have a mystic Mary Helen moment?
She's writing a country song or
Right.
West
Right.
Country
She's
song.
already
You're
told
doing
it
your-
to us.
I just got back from London.
She was doing what I'm writing, which I did what I'm writing, but then it looked like we were telling special things that happened.
Well, in true mystic fashion, none of us really know what a mystic moment is.
I believe
It's
we
whatever
thrashed
you
through
want
this
it to
last-
be.
Okay.
And since I'm facilitating this podcast, I came unprepared. I'm just working on the same stuff I've been working on, but that's good because it's consistent. I'm writing short, brief essays about mostly animals, and I'm plodding on with my blog called I Married a Music Man. No, that's not the name of it.
A Movie
I Married a
Man.
Movie Man. But I had to take a break from my movie man marriage because we took a break from watching movies to watch the entire second season of, is it Big Little Lies?
Oh, yeah, that's
It's
so good.
so good and
I know.
creepy and fun. I won't tell any more than that.
No, I love it too.
But yeah, it's a lot of
great.
fun.
Well, when that music goes off and we're about to have the mystic moment, I always expect it to be something like when Cowboy Carl or Ricardo the Mailman or Miss Yvonne
Oh,
come
Pee-wee's
to Pee Wee's Playhouse and
Yeah.
and
John B.
yeah, 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 and
Globy.
Johnny and Cherry.
Cherry.
Hey, and this is totally off the mystic topic, but if any of you have not seen Pee Wee Herman's Christmas special, it has a name, but you can just Google Pee Wee Herman's Christmas special. I highly recommend it. It's got Cher singing a version of Little Drummer Boy that you. Oh, it's not Cher. I'm so sorry. It's Grace Jones.
Oh my gosh, even better.
Easily
So much better
confused.
than Cher singing Little Drummer Boy, and you'll never forget it.
Oh, well, I have a recommendation.
Okay.
There is a YouTube video of a Norwegian woman who has trained herself to run like a horse.
I've seen that.
Isn't it incredible?
It's amazing.
It is amazing. Her name is Alia something or other, but she jumps over hurdles.
For
It's-
what purpose?
She just taught herself to run
Run
like a horse. I'll show it to you in a minute.
Oh, heck yeah.
Well, after this podcast.
Well,
It's
If we were like Joe Rogan and on the air, we could pull it up on the screen right now, but everybody will just have to envision it. So I'm looking at, we actually write outlines for these podcasts, and we have been talking about these seeds, and there's also a little suggestion here that we talk about advice, story writing advice, good and bad, that we've heard. Has anybody ever had any good or bad advice they want to share?
I have some advice. I think it's good advice, and that is if you want to be a great writer, you have to be a great reader. Otherwise, even with talent, you're running in place.
I love that advice as an avid reader. And I almost didn't want to read Margaret Wrinkle's book because I knew that I would feel about it the way I felt about it. It hit so close to home. It felt like I was writing it as I was reading it. And everybody said, nope, just go ahead and read it. It's going to be okay. And it was. It was good. It was beautiful. But I did kind of get weepy at many, many points.
The Beatitudes of the Imperfect Family, just was that one hit especially.
It was fantastic. Have you finished it?
No, I'm doling it out like Godiva chocolates.
Yeah, I sat up and finished it last night. So, yeah, reading a lot.
I just finished The Power. It's really good. It's women get all of this power in their palms and they take control of the world.
Do you read a lot, Mary Helen?
I read a lot. Right now I'm on a Richard III kick.
Oh.
Oh, yes. And who you met?
I was fortunate enough through an odd set of circumstances to meet the woman who was the lead analyst on Richard III's skeleton's DNA and spent some time with her, and she gave a little private lecture to three of us on the whole process of it. And we've just all agreed that Richard III was much maligned and was really not a bad guy, and that Shakespeare just wrote him up because the tutors were paying him to write him up as a villain. You know,
Yeah.
you do things for money.
Sure.
So Richard III, the whole story is amazing. If anybody wants to see it, her name is Turi King, Turi King, and she's got some things on YouTube, and you can see how they found Richard III under a parking lot.
Is that
Yeah,
who you
that's
met
like-
in London when you were in London?
We met her in Leicester.
Oh, the phone rings and we're all going
That
nuts.
was the discombobulated mystic.
You could say that.
That's right.
But you ask about advice we'd gotten.
Yeah.
And I actually got some advice from Mystic Marion, who's looking at me like, wait, what? Yeah, well, I don't know. You can tell me. Mystic Marion's advice to me was never to take a creative writing class. It would ruin me.
That's pretty clever. Don't we do creative writing classes occasionally for money?
I didn't even remember telling Mary Helen that, but
But you did.
good advice that I've given myself is I don't show anybody what I'm writing until I'm finished with it, because once I start getting feedback from people who aren't the person writing it, it messes me up so badly that I can't keep going. So that would be another piece of advice.
Well, you're the only person I showed what I was writing to as I was writing it.
When I think of what I said, you have to be a great reader. Most of my friends who are great readers always talk about how they'd curl up with a book when they were a young girl. And that was not my experience at all. Whenever I was assigned books by Mrs. Lois Miller, who tried very hard to make us all great readers, I tried to remember some of the books we had to read for her. They were Animal Farm, The Scarlet Letter, Tale of Two Cities, Brave New World, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, and etc. But I would divide the number of pages by the days I had to read it, and I'd read that exact number. So I was not a great reader. But when I came to college, I had this brilliant cousin who was probably the greatest reader. And he had a book sitting on the bunk bed. That was his. He slept on the top bunk bed, and on the bottom he had a book. I guess it's his bookcase. But this book was called Temple of Gold. I'm not particularly proud of starting my reading life with Temple of Gold because it was written by William Goldman, not Golding, Lord of the Flies, not that, but William Goldman, that I thought was a brilliant writer, and really he was, because he wrote adaptive screenplays. And so Hollywood grabbed me at that point reading Temple of Gold. He wrote Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, among many other, The Bridge Too Far, The Princess Bride. So he was not a slackard. That was my first beginning as a reader. But now I think I'm a better reader because I read John Irving and, of course, I mentioned Pat Conroy and a lot of the South American writers like Allie Day. So I've come far from Temple of Gold, but I do highly recommend if you want to be a writer to be a reader.
And I really love books about writing. Pat Conroy has a really good one. Oh, his is his reading life, not his writing life. Pat Conroy's reading life is excellent. And I think we've mentioned Stephen King's book before, how much we love on writing. You just feel like you're talking to your best friend. Frances Prose has a beautiful book called Reading Like a Writer, which helps not just your reading. I shouldn't say help, but, it's a great book to read about reading and writing. But then sometimes I get my hands on books that are so prescriptive that they're sort of like your advice, Marion, don't take a creative writing class. They can be so bad. It's like, here's what you need to do at this point of the story. And at this point, these two characters need to have an opposition. And at this point, they need to, and that
My problem
doesn't
with
sound like
creative writing classes was mostly that the way they were conducted, and I loved them. I took every creative writing class I could. Do I think after the first one that they helped me a whole lot? Not really. But my problem was that your feedback was coming more from your classmates, and they weren't necessarily any better writers or as good as you were. Mm-hmm. So you had all these people kind of confusing the issue about the direction you needed to go in or what the strengths and weaknesses were. I didn't find it to be an effective way to learn to be a better writer if you were already a natural writer, except that the right creative writing courses could probably make you the right contacts to help you publish.
I took one really good creative writing course in college, and it was taught by Lloyd Schwartz, who would sit elegantly on his desk, and he had long fingers and legs and a beautiful voice. And it turned out he's the NPR opera critic.
Oh, cool.
And my mother was so impressed. She's like, "You're taking a class with Lloyd Schwartz?"
Oh, I've heard him.
Yeah, he's got a beautiful voice, and he critiqued. He didn't let other people critique our work. It was an excellent class, but I was in no point in my life to be working on my creative writing.
The best thing that came out of creative writing classes for me was that we read a book called Understanding Fiction by Brooks and Warren, Cleanth Brooks and Robert Penn Warren. And after we read each story, we looked at what made the story good. And they were divided up into character, plot, imagery, and so forth. And that helped, but that goes back to what Gail said, to be a good writer, be a good reader. And if you don't know how to look at a piece of writing and see the image patterns, the character development, the word choices, it doesn't matter how many books you read until you learn to look at the ingredients in good writing.
Well, I grew up as a painter, so I am the mystic illuminator, illustrator. And I read, growing up, I was an avid reader of comic books, but of course, because I like the pictures. And I'm kind of more of a visual person, so I've been doing better about writing, but I'm coming to writing kind of later. I can draw, and I can paint, but writing is a little bit more difficult for me. So I enjoy being part of the Mystics.
But Margie, you're a great writer, and the thing that you've got nailed down is finding those exact funny moments in just a regular story, like your deranged eggs. I've botched a million recipes, but I've never written a story about it that came out to be so wonderful as your deranged egg. So you've really got an eye for the funny little bits.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
I don't think I would have ever gotten through literature classes without Classics Illustrated. I love that. I also read very inappropriate books at a very young age.
Me too.
Like what?
Well, when you're in second, third grade, you really should not be reading Edgar Allan Poe.
Oh, yes, you should.
Oh, I read Fanny Hill.
Oh, well, now at one point we had a teacher who sent a note home that we had to get a parent to sign that we could read this book. I don't even remember what the book was.
Huh.
And my dad signed it, and he wrote a little note under it that my teacher's name was Portia. And he says, Portia, Mary Helen can read anything, including what she has found in the bottom of my closet.
All right. God, I want to know what the book was.
Marion, what did you read? I know you did some really naughty things.
I read Fanny Hill, and then I remember getting in trouble in home ec because I was reading Peyton Place, and I had to go be put in the ironing board room in solitary confinement. And the home ec teacher says, this is what we have to do to separate the sheep from the wolves. But I'd already gone. The first drive-in movie I ever went to was Peyton Place with my mom and daddy. And, I'd already seen the movie, so reading the book didn't seem like something I shouldn't do. But she took that right up. And Fanny Hill was brought to Mama by a neighbor, and Mama didn't like anything that was filthy, as she called it. So she stuffed it in the recipe drawer. But I read it every day while they were busy at the store. I knew she couldn't get away during the rush hour, so I'd stand over the drawer and read Fanny Hill.
So that was your bottom of the closet.
That was my bottom of the closet. There wasn't anything at all interesting in the bottom of my parents' closets, but Fanny Hill was in the recipe drawer.
My parents kept two books behind a lock and key, and one was In Cold Blood, and the other was a beautiful Audubon book. And we were allowed to look at the Audubon book if we would wash our hands beforehand, but we were not allowed to look at In Cold Blood. So, of course, I read it as soon as I could get my hands on it, and it gave me terrible nightmares. It was terrifying.
I went to the beach with my really good friend Judy Jones, and we're both readers. We hardly exchange words. We just sit on the beach and read. And she was reading In Cold Blood, and I was reading things my girlfriend and I have argued about, which is hilarious. One of the funniest books I've ever read.
Funny. That was hilarious.
And so I'm just cracking up, laughing like a hyena, and it's scaring her more.
So how are we doing for time, Gail? I don't want to bore our readers. Okay, we're good. So we've heard all this good advice and bad advice. Is there any more bad advice out there? I thought that might be kind of a gold mine, but we got off into our reading.
I have some. I want to go with good advice because I want to say something about authors reading from their books for the audience, and that is, I just recently went to a book reading, and the author's quite good, but he read 3 full short stories, and by the time he was finished, my toes were cramping and my brain was dead. I have no idea what the third story is about. So I would advise authors who need it from me. Like Stephen King, I'm sure is listening to this, but
I'm sure he is.
I would advise them to talk about their books and read passages from them, because if you read the entire book, why should your audience buy it?
Yeah, Gail, we had an event not too long ago in Fayette, Alabama, and in preparation for the event, Gail sent us all an email, and she told us that we needed to read excerpts from our stories. And then, because she thinks we're all idiots, she defined excerpts for us.
Yes,
out of
because
the dictionary.
because one member of our team who's not here, and I won't mention Joanne's name, is she will read literally 6 pages and take everybody's time. So I was just trying to give everybody an idea of what an excerpt might be.
Remember in that reading, Joanne, being the sensitive soul she is, she had a timer set and she was on the money on that one. She was like, okay, I'm done.
Yeah, the timer went ding and she sat down.
Some good advice I would say to writers, and of course all good advice has to be taken with a grain of salt, just like bad advice does. But we had a sign in the English department before I retired. When you got off the elevator, there was a big sign that said, "The road to hell is paved with adverbs."
Oh, I love it.
And I have found that to be an absolutely true statement. That if I would, before I turned anything over for somebody else to read, I think I'd proofread it and make sure I didn't have any adverbs that didn't need to be there. Of course, it's never to say you can't use an adverb, but weigh them wisely.
All right. Well, I know that everyone in the listening world is sad to hear that our podcast on stories, sort of, is coming to a close. And we've had a lot of fun, and we've had fun with Mary Helen, and maybe she'll come back.
Thank you, Mary Helen.
So, how would anyone go about contacting us, the Mystic Order? Marion, how would someone contact us?
They could find us on Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
They could go to the Mystic Order, or they could, of East Alabama Fiction Writers, or they could find us on Twitter at the Mystics with an S pod. They could find us on youtube.com/the Mystics pod. Or they could drop us a line at themysticspod@gmail.com. You can contact us directly to schedule readings, or you can order our books, which are available on Amazon.
And that Gail's son, Rivers Langley, the famous podcaster, told us a little bit about branding, and that's why most of our social media is under the Mystics Pod, and there is an S on that, Mystics. But we had set up our Facebook page long before we were doing a podcast, and that's why it's the outlier. So you can just find us very easily by those things Marion said. We're coming to the end of Season 1. This is our penultimate podcast for Season 1, and we will be resuming Season 2 on January 9th.
January 9th.
January 9th.
This is number 11 of Season 1, and we have number 12 coming up. It's going to be on the wonderful subject of islands. And so, speaking of exposing yourself, I think all these women have on an island. So,
did you say we've all exposed ourselves on an island?
Not me.
I think she said
Not me,
that.
just you guys.
Mary Helen, how do people get in touch with you if they want to invite you to come speak somewhere or just chat with you?
Well, I have a Facebook page, Mary Helen Brown, Headed for Home. And you can also contact me, email brownm8, which I think is an Auburn thing. They said Mary Helen and said 8 instead of H. So I don't know. So it's brownm8@auburn.edu.
Well, all right. Oh, Marion has something to say.
One thing I'd like to add is that Mary Helen's book was published by Solomon and George Publishers, and has the beautiful cover, a most beautiful cover, that we can't show you on a podcast, but I think that if you look the book up, without even reading it, you'll want to buy it because the cover's so beautiful.
There you go. Well, if you've enjoyed this podcast, as usual, please rate, review, and subscribe. And remember, be the flame,
Not the moth.